I walked 45 minutes through the Savannah dark at 5 in the morning, carrying a music box I had spent 8 months restoring for a granddaughter I had never touched. When I reached that hospital room, my daughter-in-law stood in the doorway, looked straight through me, and said the words that rearranged everything. "You are not welcome here tonight, Frank." She had no idea who had been quietly rebuilding every wall she was standing inside. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it actually began, which was in the silence. In the particular kind of stillness that only exists inside a house at 4 in the morning when the person who used to fill it has been gone for 4 years and the man left behind is sitting at a kitchen table with cold coffee, staring at a music box he is not sure anyone will ever open. The text came in at 4:17. I know because I was already awake. I am always awake at that hour, not by choice, but by habit. The kind that forms when you spend 3 years rising before dawn to check on someone whose heart was failing. And then the someone is gone, but the waking remains, like a door you keep opening into an empty room. Marcus, my son. Dad. Priya is in labor. Baby is coming early. 8 words. I read them once. I read them again the way I read a structural assessment when something about the numbers does not sit right. Not one of those 8 words was come. Not one was hurry. Not one was we need you here. 8 words, and a silence around them that said more than any of them did. I set the phone on the table. The screen went dark. The kitchen held its breath, the way old houses do when something shifts inside them. Not a crack, not a groan, just a settling, a redistribution of weight that only someone who has lived inside the structure long enough would recognize. I went to the back room where I keep my bag, the one I have kept packed since Priya entered her 3rd trimester. Because I am a man who prepares for things the way I was taught to, which is early, and with the assumption that the thing you are preparing for will arrive before you are ready. Clean shirt, my good trousers, the leather shaving kit Eleanor gave me 9 years ago that I still use, because it works, and because replacing it would mean admitting something I cannot yet afford to admit. I set them in the bag the way your hands do things they have practiced when your mind is somewhere else entirely. Then I went to the workshop. The music box was on the bench where I had left it, sitting on a square of green felt beneath the overhead lamp. 8 months of work, mahogany and brass and a mechanical movement I had rebuilt from 63 individual pieces, each one cleaned and measured and fitted with the patience of a man who learned 44 years ago that the difference between something that lasts and something that fails is almost never about the material. It is about the care you give to the parts no one will ever see. It was Eleanor's music box. Or rather, it had been a broken thing she found at a flea market on Tybee Island 20 years ago, handed to me across a folding table covered in someone else's discarded history, and said with that look she had when she recognized something worth saving, "Frank, this is broken. That means it is ours." I restored it. I always did when she found broken things. That was our arrangement. She found them. I fixed them. And somewhere in that exchange was everything we ever needed to say about love without actually saying it. The mechanism played Clair de Lune, Debussy, the same piece Eleanor played on the piano in our living room every evening for 37 years, the notes drifting through the house like light through stained glass, coloring everything they touched. When I got the movement working again, I set it in a new housing I had shaped from a single block of mahogany, carved the joints by hand, and fitted a small brass plate on the inside of the lid. On it I had engraved 2 lines, "For Sophie, from Grandpa Frank." And beneath that, "Every beautiful thing was once broken. Restoration is just love with patience." I wrapped the box in cloth, set it in a bag I had lined with foam to absorb any impact, and I stopped in front of the photograph of Eleanor on the shelf above the workbench. Summertime, maybe 12 years ago, standing on the front porch with the live oaks behind her, the Spanish moss catching the late light, her face turned half toward the camera with the expression she wore when she did not know she was being watched. That was her real face. I knew the difference. I looked at her a long time. She would already be at the hospital if she were still here. She would already have a plan and a bag and a casserole wrapped in foil and the exact right thing to say to everyone in the room. Eleanor always had a plan. I had a music box and 45 minutes of sidewalk between me and my granddaughter. I locked the front door at 4:31. The air outside was February in Savannah, which is not the cold of the northern states, but something softer, damper. A chill that does not bite so much as lean against you and wait. Oglethorpe Square was empty. The live oaks stood in the dark like cathedral columns, their branches arching overhead, the Spanish moss hanging motionless in the still air. I have walked these squares for 44 years. I have restored buildings on nearly every block between here and the river. I know where every brick was laid and every facade was saved and every cornice was reattached by hands that understood the value of what they were holding. At that hour, the city was mine in a way it rarely is. The gas lamps along Bull Street cast small pools of amber on the sidewalk. The old homes stood shoulder to shoulder, their shutters closed, their stoops swept clean, each one a structure that someone had chosen to preserve instead of replace. I walked past them the way I always do, reading their faces the way I read blueprints, looking for the story beneath the surface. I thought about Marcus, about the 8 words, and the space around them. The space where the invitation should have been. I turned that over in my mind the way I turn a restoration plan on the drafting table, looking for the measurement that does not match. I thought about Eleanor, about what she told me once on the porch, late enough that the cicadas had started and the square had gone quiet. Do not chase him, Frank. He will build his own rooms. Just make sure there is always a door he can come back through. I had been trying to hold both halves of that instruction for 4 years. I was not sure I had ever gotten the balance right. The sky began to lighten somewhere past Forsyth Park, not a sunrise so much as a slow retreat of darkness, the city revealing itself in stages the way old plaster reveals the layers beneath when you strip it carefully. Memorial Health appeared at the end of the block, a tall modern building that caught the early light on its upper floors and held the night in its lower ones. I walked toward the glass doors and I thought about Sophie. A girl I had not yet seen, breathing her first hours somewhere above me in a room I had not yet found. And I thought, with the quiet certainty of a man who has spent his life assessing what structures can bear, that whatever was waiting for me on the 4th floor, I was built to carry it. I was wrong about that. The lobby smelled the way hospitals always smell. That particular blend of clean and anxious, as if the building itself has been trained to hold its breath. I have spent my career inside old structures, and I can tell you that every building has a scent. Churches smell like stone and patience. Courthouses smell like paper and decisions that cannot be undone. Hospitals smell like the space between one thing and the next. I found the directory on the wall. Maternity, 4th floor. I pressed the elevator button with the music box tucked under my arm, and my phone buzzed. Marcus. Dad. You made it? Just walked in, I said. A pause on the line. Longer than it needed to be. Then his voice came back lower. Careful. As though he was cupping his hand around the phone, so the sound would not carry. Listen. Just come up. But let her lead. Okay? Whatever she says tonight, just let her lead. Let her lead. 2 words that told me more than the 8 he had sent at 4:17. They told me my son was managing a situation. And they told me I was part of the situation being managed. The elevator opened onto a hallway that smelled like antiseptic and recycled air. Pale linoleum, flat lighting, the kind of place where serious things happen and the architecture has trained itself not to react. A nurse's station to my left, and at the far end of the corridor, standing with his hands in his pockets and his eyes already on me, was my son. Marcus has his mother's coloring. The dark hair, the way his face settles into something unreadable when he is trying to hold 2 opposing forces in place. I have always been able to tell when Marcus is under strain because he gets very still, the way a cracked beam gets still when it is carrying more than it was designed for. He was very still. He did not smile when he saw me. He watched me come down the hallway with an expression I did not have a name for. When I reached him, he gripped my hand quick and firm and let go. "She had a tough delivery," he said. "Emergency cesarean. But she is okay. And the baby?" Something crossed his face. Something that almost broke through the stillness, the way light almost breaks through a boarded window. "Sophie," he said. "Her name is Sophie." "She is perfect, Dad." I nodded. I looked past him toward the door at the end of the hall. Small window at eye level, thin curtain pulled most of the way across. "I would like to see them," I said. Marcus did not move toward the door. He looked at it, then back at me, and he was opening his mouth when the door opened from the inside. Priya stood in the doorway. Hospital gown, hair pulled back, her face carrying the particular exhaustion of a woman who had been through something enormous. But her eyes were clear. That was the first thing I noticed. Clear and steady and aimed directly at me the way eyes aim when they have already decided what they are going to say. "Frank," she said. "I am glad you made it safely. Congratulations, Priya. How are you feeling?" "Tired," she said. Then she was quiet. The way a person is quiet when they are weighing the next sentence, the way an engineer weighs a load. "I need to tell you something. I only want family in this room right now. My mother is here. My sister is here. I need to protect this space. I hope you can understand that." I stood there with the music box under my arm and I said as evenly as I knew how, "I am family, Priya." "My family," she said. "My support system. That is what I need tonight." 9 words. "You are not welcome here tonight, Frank. I need to protect this space." That is what they amounted to when you stripped away the careful phrasing and the hospital gown and the exhaustion. 9 words delivered calmly and without visible cruelty, which somehow made them land harder than if she had shouted them. Because cruelty you can brace against. Calm exclusion passes through every wall you have ever built. I turned to look at Marcus because a man in that moment looks to his son the way he would look to anyone who might step in, who might say something, who might redirect the moment towards something bearable. Marcus was looking at the floor. His hands were in his pockets. His jaw was set. "She is right, Dad," he said. His voice was low, almost gentle, which made it worse. Maybe next time. Maybe next time. As if my granddaughter's first hours in the world were a reservation that could be rescheduled. I did not say anything. I looked at the door one more time. Through the gap at the edge of the curtain, I could see the corner of a white blanket, the foot of a bed, and nothing else. But I could hear, or I told myself I could hear, beneath the hum of the building, the soft and unsteady breathing of something very new and very small. I set the music box on the nurse's station counter, the closest flat surface to the door. I set it there carefully, the way you set down anything that took 8 months to restore and will not be picked up again by the hands that made it. "Give this to Sophie when she is bigger," I said. I did not specify who I was saying it to. Then I turned and walked back down the hallway toward the elevator. Pressed the button. Waited. Nobody called after me. The doors opened. I stepped inside. They closed. There was a mirror on the back wall. The scratched institutional kind. I caught my own face without meaning to. Flannel shirt, work boots, hands that had spent 44 years holding broken things together. I looked at that man and I thought, this is what she sees. This is what she has always seen. And then I thought, the thing I did not want to think, the question that was quieter and more damaging than any of the words spoken in that hallway. How long has Marcus been seeing it too? I walked home in silence. The city was waking around me. Joggers on Forsyth Park, a delivery truck on Drayton Street, the gas lamps extinguished by daylight. The same squares, the same oaks, the same moss. But nothing looked the same, because I was not the same man who had walked through them an hour ago. I let myself into the house. stood in the living room where Eleanor's piano sat beneath the stained glass window that cast a rainbow across the room every morning at 7:15. The piano was silent. The window was dark. It was too early for rainbows. I sat on the bench and put my hands on the keys without pressing them. The wood was cool beneath my fingers. 40 years of Eleanor's hands and now mine, and the keys did not know the difference. And what I said to that woman on the phone 3 days later set everything into motion, because what Priya never knew, what my own son had been hiding for 2 years, and what that phone call would eventually force into the open, was about to change everything for all of us. Stay with me. This story does not end the way they expected. It ends the way they deserved. My name is Frank Moretti. I am 71 years old, and I have spent my life restoring things other people wanted to tear down. That is not a metaphor. It is a job description. 44 years with my hands inside the walls of buildings that most people had already given up on. Churches with crumbling bell towers, courthouses with sagging foundations, townhouses on the historic register that developers wanted to gut and turn into something glass and efficient and forgettable. I was the man they called when a building was too old to be useful and too important to lose, and my job was to find the difference between the two, which was almost always smaller than people expected. I started at 27. Apprenticed to a man named Clement Duchamp, 78 now, retired, living in a one-room cabin on Tybee Island that he built himself and filled with law books and French wine and the particular silence of a man who has said everything he needed to say and is content to stop. Clement was a restoration architect before the term existed in Savannah. He learned his trade in New Orleans, brought it east, and spent 40 years convincing city councils and preservation boards that the old things were worth keeping. He taught me the first principle I ever carried into a job site. We were standing inside the shell of a burned chapel on East Broughton Street. 1983. Rain coming through what used to be the roof. Pigeons nesting in what used to be the choir loft. I was 27 and overwhelmed. I told him the building was finished. He did not look up from the wall he was examining. "Moretti," he said, running his hand along a beam that had survived the fire because it was heart pine, and heart pine does not give up easily. "Never strip what you can preserve. The original is always worth more than the replacement." I never forgot that. Never strip what you can preserve. That was the principle I carried into every project, every negotiation, every late night bent over drawings, while Eleanor played piano in the next room. You do not overpower a problem. You understand it. You find where the damage concentrates, and you address it without destroying what the damage is hiding, which is almost always the thing that matters most. That is what a restoration architect does. We find what was always there beneath the surface, and we bring it back into the light. The people who walk through the finished building never think about the man who spent 6 months on his knees in the crawl space, reinforcing joists that nobody will ever see. That was always fine with me. Bridges are built to be crossed without gratitude. So are the beams that hold up the floor you are standing on. By 2001, I was leading the most significant restoration projects in the Savannah Historic District. The Mercer Williams House, after the termite damage. The First African Baptist Church foundation stabilization. The row of federal period townhouses on Columbia Square that a hurricane had shifted 3 inches off plumb and everyone said should come down. I spent 14 months bringing them back to level. 14 months of jacking and shimming and persuading old brick to forgive new pressure. When the work was finished, you could not tell anything had happened. That was the point. My hands have held the bones of buildings older than this country. I have read the history of Savannah in its mortar joints and its heart pine beams and the handmade nails that blacksmiths forged 200 years ago. I understand that a building is not a single thing. It is a relationship between forces. Compression and tension, load and support, the weight of what sits above, and the strength of what holds it from below. A good restoration does not fight the damage. It finds a way to carry it. I learned that from Clement. I practiced it for 44 years. And without knowing it, I applied it to everything else in my life that was breaking. The house is on Oglethorpe Square. 3 stories, federal style. built in 1847 by a cotton merchant whose name is on the deed but not in anyone's memory. Eleanor and I bought it in 1994 when it was nothing but good bones and bad plumbing, and a porch that leaned so hard to the south you could set a marble on it and watch it roll to the railing. We restored it together. 30 years. Every room was a conversation. Eleanor wanted more windows. I told her the load-bearing walls needed to hold. She told me a house that does not let the light in is just a box with a lid. She was right. I redesigned the south wall and installed the stained glass panels I had been collecting from salvage yards and demolition sites for a decade. 12 panels from 12 buildings I could not save, each one carried out before the wrecking ball arrived, each one a piece of something beautiful that would have been lost if nobody had thought to look. Every morning at 7:15, the sun hits those panels and the living room fills with color. Reds and golds and deep blues thrown across the walls, across the piano, across the floor where Eleanor used to stand barefoot with her coffee and say, "You see, Frank, the light always finds a way in." Behind the house is the workshop. Drafting table, hand tools, salvage materials, and the work that has kept my hands busy since I stopped keeping them busy for money. It is where I go when the house gets too quiet, which it has been for 4 years. And above the workbench, on a shelf I built from reclaimed cypress, are the stained glass panels I kept for myself. 18 pieces, each one from a building I restored, each one a window into a room that no longer exists but whose light I refuse to let go of. Eleanor called them my memory windows. She said every restorer needs proof that the things he saved were real. Doris. She was right about that. Eleanor was right about most things. She had a way of seeing what I could not see until she pointed at it. I understood structures. She understood the spaces between them. I could tell you the compressive strength of a 200-year-old brick. She could tell you why the room it built still mattered. People think restoration is about the past. It is not. It is about faith. Faith that what someone built 200 years ago is still worth standing inside. Faith that the crack in the wall is not a death sentence but a question, and the answer, if you are patient enough to find it, is almost always yes. This can be saved. I spent 44 years answering that question with my hands, and I never once asked it about myself. But I am getting ahead of things again. To understand why I walked through the dark carrying a music box for a granddaughter I was not allowed to hold, you have to understand the woman who found that music box at a flea market 20 years ago, held it up to the light, and said the 6 words that became the foundation of everything. "Frank, this is broken. That means it is ours." Eleanor found the music box at a flea market on Tybee Island on a Saturday morning in June, 20 years ago. We had driven out for the day. No particular plan, which was unusual for me, and entirely typical of her. I plan. Eleanor wandered. And somehow the things she wandered into were always more important than anything I had ever planned for. The flea market was spread across a church parking lot 2 blocks from the beach. Folding tables covered with other people's histories. Old tools. Costume jewelry. Picture frames with strangers still inside them. Eleanor moved through it the way she moved through everything, with her hands slightly forward as if the world were a fabric she was reading by touch. She stopped at a table near the back, picked up a small wooden box, dark with age, the brass hinges green with oxidation. One corner split along the grain. She turned it over in her hands, opened the lid. Nothing happened. Whatever mechanism had lived inside, it was frozen or broken or both. She held it up to me. "Frank, this is broken. That means it is ours." I took it home, set it on the workbench, opened it the way I open a building I have been hired to assess, carefully, with respect for whatever I am about to find. The mechanism was a Swiss cylinder movement, probably 1920s, hand-assembled. 63 individual pieces, most of them seized with corrosion, 3 of them missing entirely. The cylinder itself was intact, which meant the song was still in there, locked inside the rust and the silence, waiting for someone patient enough to find it. It took me 4 months. 4 months of soaking, cleaning, reshaping tiny brass pins with tools I had to modify because no one makes them anymore. Eleanor would come to the workshop in the evenings, set a cup of coffee on the bench, and watch without speaking. She understood the work. She understood that restoration cannot be rushed. The way you cannot rush a wound into healing. You can only create the conditions and wait. The evening I got it working, I called her in. She stood beside me. I closed the lid, opened it, and the mechanism turned, and the pins struck the comb, and the room filled with clair de lune. Débouche. Slow, measured. Each note arriving with the patience of light moving across a wall. Eleanor put her hand over her mouth. Not because she was surprised, because she recognized it. She had been playing that piece on the piano since she was 14 years old. A song she carried inside her the way I carried blueprints, the way both of us carried the belief that old things were worth more than people gave them credit for. That became our song. Not because we chose it, but because it chose us, the way broken things choose the people who are supposed to fix them. Eleanor played Clair de Lune on the piano in our living room every evening for 37 years. I would be in the workshop or the kitchen or the porch, and the notes would drift through the house the way the light drifted through the stained glass, coloring everything they touched without asking permission. Marcus grew up inside that sound. It was the backdrop of his homework and his dinners and his arguments with us about curfew and the car keys and all the small, ordinary battles that make up a childhood. He probably did not notice it. You do not notice the thing that is always there. You only notice when it stops. Eleanor was not a professional musician. She did not perform. She played the way I restored, for the thing itself, not for an audience. Her technique was imperfect and her timing wandered in places, and none of that mattered because the music was not about precision. It was about presence. It was about a woman sitting at a piano in a room full of colored light, putting something beautiful into a space that would have been silent without her. That was Eleanor's gift. She did not restore buildings. She restored the silence inside them. She filled rooms the way she filled a marriage, not by being loud but by being there so completely that her absence, when it came, would be the loudest thing I had ever heard. She knew things about people that I could only know about structures. I could read a wall and tell you where it would crack in 10 years. She could read a face and tell you where the sadness was hiding before the person wearing it knew it was there. She read Marcus that way. Even when he was young, she would watch him across the dinner table with an expression I came to recognize, the look of someone cataloging damage that had not yet appeared. She never said it directly, but one evening, late summer, the cicadas going hard in the oaks outside and the square gone quiet below the porch, she said something I have carried ever since. Do not chase him, Frank. He will build his own rooms. Just make sure there is always a door he can come back through. I asked her what she meant. She looked at the live oaks, the Spanish moss moving in whatever passed for a breeze, and she said, "He is built like you, Frank. Strong frame. But he does not know yet what he is built to carry. He will try to carry the wrong things first. Everyone does. I did not understand her then. I understand her now. But understanding something 4 years too late is its own kind of damage. The kind you cannot restore, because the original is already gone. We had 40 years together. 40 years of coffee on the porch and arguments about windows and evenings where the piano filled the house and neither of us spoke because the music said enough. 40 years of her finding broken things and me fixing them, and both of us pretending the exchange was about objects when it was always about something larger. I loved Eleanor the way I loved buildings. Not with grand gestures, but with attention. With the daily act of noticing what needed care and providing it before anyone had to ask. I did not talk about love the way people talk about it in songs. I talked about it the way wood talks about it. By holding. By bearing weight. By lasting. She understood that. She was the only person who ever did, and she understood something else that I am only now beginning to see. She knew where the cracks would form in our family before they appeared. She knew because she had been watching Marcus the way I watched foundations, patiently, carefully, and with the quiet certainty that pressure always finds the weakest joint. She was right about that. She was always right. But she was also about to be diagnosed with something that would take everything except her certainty that the people she loved were worth holding together. Eleanor's heart was the strongest thing about her. Until it wasn't. The cardiologist used the term congestive heart failure, the way contractors use the term structural compromise. Clinical, measured, designed to communicate severity without causing panic. He sat behind a desk in an office at Memorial Health and explained what was happening inside my wife's chest with diagrams and percentages and a prognosis that amounted to this. The walls of her heart were thickening. The chambers were stiffening. The organ that had kept her alive for 64 years was slowly forgetting how to do its job. I understood the mechanics immediately. A structure losing its capacity to bear load. I had seen it in buildings 100 times. The difference was that I could reinforce a building. I could sister a joist, replace a beam, pour a new footer. I could not do any of those things to a heart. The first year was small losses. She got winded climbing the stairs. She needed to rest after walking to the square. She would sit on the porch in the evenings, and I would notice that her breathing had a new sound to it, a faint rasp at the edges, like a door that no longer sits flush in its frame. The second year was bigger. She stopped playing piano. Not all at once. First, she shortened the sessions. Then she skipped evenings. Then one night I waited in the workshop for the sound of Clair de Lune, and it did not come. And I walked into the living room and found her sitting on the bench with her hands in her lap, looking at the keys the way you look at a language you used to speak but can no longer find the words for. "I cannot feel the pedals," she said. "My feet are too swollen." I knelt beside her. I put my hands on hers. And I understood in that moment that the silence in this house was going to get worse before it got better, and that it might not ever get better at all. By the third year, she could not leave the bedroom. I brought the world to her instead. Every morning at 7:15, when the sun hit the stained glass and the living room filled with color, I would describe it to her. The reds first, then the golds, then the deep blues moving across the piano like something alive. She would close her eyes and smile, and I knew she was seeing it, not through my words but through 30 years of having stood in that light herself. I took care of her for all 3 years. I did not hire help until the final months when a hospice nurse named Grace began coming twice a week. Grace had steady hands and a voice like warm flannel, and she taught me things no engineering degree ever covered. How to manage medications. How to turn Eleanor in bed without causing pain. How to speak simply, without making her feel small. "He is still in there," Grace told me once, pressing her hand on Eleanor's. "The music is still in there. She just cannot reach the keys." Marcus came home twice during those 3 years. The first time, Eleanor was still strong enough to sit up. She held his face in both hands and said, "My beautiful boy." He cried in the car afterward, and I stood beside him and said nothing, because there was nothing that words could reach. The second time was 4 months later. He stayed 2 days. I noticed his hands. They trembled when he poured water. They shook when he held his coffee. I asked him if he was all right, and he said he was tired. Long shifts at the hospital. I accepted that because Eleanor was dying in the next room and I did not have the capacity to investigate a tremor in my son's hands when the woman I loved was losing her ability to breathe. I wish I had looked harder. A restorer is trained to see what the surface is hiding. But when the building you are standing inside is the one that is collapsing, you stop examining walls and start holding them up with your bare hands. He did not come back after that. I do not blame him for it. Though I want to sometimes, in the hours before dawn, when blame feels simpler than grief. Watching someone you love diminish while their body remains requires an endurance not everyone is built for. Marcus was built for forward motion, for speed. That was always in him, and Eleanor saw it before I did. In September, 3 weeks before she died, Eleanor had what Grace called a lucid window, a brief clearing, like sunlight breaking through overcast after days of rain. She was propped in bed. The curtain was open. The live oak outside the window had just begun to turn, the leaves edging toward gold. She looked at me. Clear. Present. The way she looked at me on our wedding day. The way she looked at me the evening the music box first played. "Frank," she said, "I am here. I know." She blinked. Her hand moved across the blanket, and I caught it. Thin, every bone visible, but her grip was sure. "The compositions," she said. "In the piano bench. 3 envelopes. I wrote them when my hands still worked. Do not open them until the house needs music again." I wanted to ask more, but her eyes were already drifting toward the window. The oak pulling her attention the way beauty always pulled her. Gently, without apology. "What are they?" I asked. "Songs," she said. "For the people who will need them most." Her grip loosened. Her breathing slowed. She did not say my name again. Eleanor died 11 days later on a Friday afternoon in October. In the living room, not the bedroom, because I had carried her downstairs that morning, so she could be near the piano one last time. Claire de Lune played from a small speaker beside her pillow because her hands could no longer play it, and mine never learned how. The stained glass threw its colors across the room, across the piano, across her face. I was holding her hand. The live oak was full gold outside the window, every leaf catching the afternoon light like something lit from within. And I thought that if the light could hold still for this, then so could I. I found the envelopes 2 weeks after the funeral. Inside the piano bench, beneath a stack of old sheet music. 3 envelopes, cream-colored, sealed. Eleanor's handwriting, steady and sure, written in the years before the disease took her hands. The first, for Frank. Adagio, in the empty room. The second, for Marcus. Sonata for shaking hands. The third, for the one who guards the door. Prelude to an open window. I held them in my lap for a long time. The living room was dark. The stained glass was just glass without the sun behind it. The piano was just wood and wire without the woman who played it. I put them back inside the bench. Closed the lid. They could wait. What could not wait was the phone call I received the following morning. From a man at a medical licensing office in Atlanta, asking questions about my son that turned the floor beneath me into something I no longer trusted. But before I tell you about that phone call and what it revealed about my son, I need to tell you about the woman he married. Because what happened in that hospital doorway did not begin at the hospital. It began 2 years earlier. At a table in a restaurant where I first understood that the bridge I was building toward my son's new life might not have a foundation on the other side. The restaurant was called The Gray. It was built inside a restored Greyhound bus terminal from 1938, which meant I liked it before I walked through the door. Art Deco tile work, original terrazzo floors, steel-framed windows that someone had the good sense to preserve instead of replace. Marcus picked it. He said Priya liked it. He said it twice, as if that explained everything. It was a Thursday evening in October, 2 years before the wedding. 14 months since Eleanor had passed. The live oaks along Bull Street had just begun to turn, the light going gold through the Spanish moss. I had driven from the townhouse, 10 minutes through the historic district, listening to nothing, just the engine and my own thoughts arranging themselves the way material lists arrange themselves before a project begins. Marcus had been dating Priya for 11 months. I had seen photographs. She was a sociology professor at the Savannah College of Art and Design, published researcher. Smart, by every account. Marcus described her the way young men describe women who impress and unsettle them in equal measure, with admiration wrapped so tightly around caution that you could not tell where one ended and the other began. I wanted to like her. I need you to understand that. I put on a clean shirt. I brought a small stained glass sun catcher from the workshop, a piece I had made from salvage, blue and amber. The colors Eleanor always said looked like the ocean remembering the sun. I wanted to walk into that restaurant and see the woman my son loved and feel something that resembled hope. I arrived 15 minutes early. I always do. Restorers are early or they are wrong. I sat at the table, ordered water, and watched the door. Marcus came in first. He looked good, taller than I remembered, though I know that is not possible at 32. He hugged me quick, firm. One pat on the back. She is parking, he said. Then he sat across from me, fidgeted with the napkin, folded it, unfolded it, pressed the crease flat with his thumb. I recognized the gesture. It was mine. Eleanor used to call it my blueprint hands, always flattening, straightening, measuring things that did not need measuring. Dad, just be yourself. But maybe do not bring up the house too much. Or the workshop. She is particular about first impressions. Particular. I filed the word away. In restoration, particular means exact. In people, it usually means something else. Priya arrived 7 minutes later. Dark hair pulled back, gray blazer, a confidence in her movement that filled the space before her words did. She moved through the restaurant the way people move through rooms they consider theirs. Not arrogant exactly, but certain. She knew the host by name. She knew the waiter. She had been here before. This was her territory. She reached the table. Marcus stood. I stood. She extended her hand. Mr. Moretti. It is so nice to finally meet you. Her grip was firm. Her smile was calibrated. Warm enough to pass, cool enough to measure. I had seen that kind of smile across negotiation tables and preservation board hearings. It was the smile of someone who had already decided what you were and was waiting for you to confirm it. Call me Frank, I said. Everyone does. Frank, she repeated, testing the weight. Then she sat. We ordered. She chose a wine I could not pronounce and a grain bowl with ingredients I did not recognize. I ordered a steak. Marcus ordered whatever Priya suggested. I noticed that. I noticed it the way I notice a hairline crack in a support column. Not alarming yet, but worth watching. The conversation started safely. Her research, her department, a paper on intergenerational family dynamics that had been published in some journal I nodded at politely. She described social structures the way I described physical ones, with precision and authority. I respected that. I told her so. Thank you, she said. Marcus tells me you are in construction. Restoration, I said. I restore historic buildings. 44 years. She nodded. The way people nod at professions they have already categorized. Right. Manual labor with aesthetic pretension. That must be satisfying in its own way. The table shifted. Not visibly. The way a building shifts when a load is applied to a joint that was not designed to carry it. Marcus looked at his plate. I let it pass. A restored building does not react to every vibration. It absorbs and continues. I offered her the sun catcher. She held it up to the light briefly, said it was lovely, and set it beside her bread plate where it stayed for the rest of the evening untouched. Halfway through the main course, she asked about the house. Marcus stiffened. I could see his jaw tighten. It is on Oglethorpe Square, I said. Eleanor and I restored it over 30 years. She set down her fork. Looked at me. Not with admiration. With something closer to reassessment. As if the category she had placed me in had shifted and she was not sure she liked the new one. That is a lot of house for one man, Frank. Maybe it is time to think about what you need versus what you are holding on to. The table went quiet. The candle between us flickered from the overhead vent. I understood what she was really saying. Not about the house. About me. About what I represented. A widower in a too large house on a too quiet square, holding on to a life that had already ended. Then she said the thing that settled into my chest like a nail driven into green wood. The kind that holds fast and rusts in place and becomes part of the structure whether you want it there or not. Marcus needs to build forward, Frank, not restore backward. I hope you can support that. Build forward, not restore backward. As if everything behind us, Eleanor, the house, the stained glass, the piano, the 30 years of hands and light and music, was wreckage to be cleared, not a foundation to be honored. I smiled. I said something polite. I do not remember what. We finished dinner. I shook her hand. I drove home through streets I had spent 44 years preserving, past buildings I had saved from demolition, through squares that existed because someone believed the old things were worth keeping. And I thought the thing I did not want to think. The woman my son loved had looked at everything I had spent my life restoring and seen something to demolish. And what frightened me most was not that she believed it. It was that Marcus might believe it too. But that was the dinner. What happened the one time she came to the house was worse. She came to the house once. Once in 2 years of dating, an engagement, a wedding, and a pregnancy. Priya Sharma Moretti set foot inside my home exactly one time, and she made sure I understood it would be the last. It was Memorial Day weekend, the summer before the wedding. Marcus called on a Tuesday, voice careful, the way it always got when he was navigating between two people who wanted different things. We are thinking of driving up for the weekend. Priya wants to see the square. Not Priya wants to see you. Not we want to spend time together. The square. As if I were a feature of the neighborhood, an amenity, like the fountain or the monument. That sounds wonderful, I said. Because it did. Because I had been alone in that house for 23 months, and the idea of footsteps other than mine on those hardwood floors made my chest tighten in a way no amount of structural knowledge could explain. I spent 4 days getting ready. I cleaned every room, washed windows I had not touched since Eleanor died, swept the porch, polished the banister. I drove to the market on Broughton Street and bought fresh shrimp, grits from the stone mill outside Savannah, a bottle of white wine I could not pronounce, because Marcus told me Priya preferred white. I set new towels in the guest room with the corners folded the way hotels do. I do not know why. Maybe because I wanted her to see that this house, Eleanor's house, was not what she expected. That it was cared for. That it held something worth respecting. They arrived Saturday afternoon. Marcus stepped out smiling, genuine, the kind of smile I used to see when he was 12 and I picked him up from school. For a moment he was just my boy again. Priya stepped out slowly. She wore white sneakers that had never touched unpaved ground and sunglasses that covered half her face. She looked at the house the way a demolition surveyor looks at a structure that has already been condemned, searching for confirmation. It is very historic, she said. Not beautiful. Not impressive. Historic. The way you describe something that belongs in a display case instead of a life. Marcus jumped in. It is incredible, Priya. Dad restored most of it himself. She pushed her sunglasses up into her hair. Scanned the porch, the columns, the ironwork railing I had recast by hand from an original mold. A museum, she said. Not a home. She smiled when she said it. The kind of smile that pretends to be a compliment while performing a dismissal. The first evening went well enough on the surface. We ate on the porch. Shrimp, grits, grilled okra. The square was green and gold in the long June light. A couple walked past with a dog. The live oaks made their slow, enormous shadows across the lawn. I told a story about the time Eleanor tried to refinish the parlor floor herself and ended up sanding through to the subfloor in one corner. She laughed so hard, she sat down in the sawdust and refused to move until I brought her coffee. Marcus laughed. Priya cut her shrimp into precise squares and said nothing. After dinner, she asked about the internet. We have it, I said. But the signal is unreliable in old buildings. Thick walls. She looked at Marcus. Just a look. But I knew that look. It was the look that says, this confirms what I already believed. The next morning I woke early. Made coffee. Set out shrimp and grits. Eleanor's Sunday recipe. The one Marcus used to request every weekend as a boy. I heard footsteps on the stairs and turned expecting my son. It was Priya. She stood in the kitchen doorway in a silk robe, arms crossed, scanning the room. Her eyes moved across the cast-iron skillets, the hand-painted tile backsplash Eleanor had done one summer, the shelf of glass jars filled with dried herbs from the garden that had gone wild since Eleanor died. "Marcus is still asleep," she said. "He always sleeps late. In places like this. Places like this." 3 words, carrying a sentence underneath them. Places without noise machines. Places that smell like old wood and history, instead of whatever a modern apartment is supposed to smell like. I poured her coffee. She held it with both hands, looked out the kitchen window at the square, and then she looked at the shelf above the counter, where I kept the stained glass pieces Eleanor and I had collected together. Small salvage panels, fragments of color from buildings long gone. "That is a lot of glass," she said. Hoarding disguised as curation. I set down the coffee pot. "Each one of those pieces is from a building that no longer exists," I said. "They are the only proof those buildings were ever real." She sipped her coffee, looked at me the way she had looked at me across the restaurant table. Measuring, categorizing, filing. "Frank," she said, "can I be honest with you? I would prefer it. Marcus and I are building something specific. A life. A direction. And I think it is important that the people around us understand that direction. This is a lovely place. For you. But it is not the kind of place Marcus needs to keep coming back to. He needs to be moving forward. Moving forward. As if standing still in a house you built with your hands and your wife's laughter was the same as going backward. As if loyalty to what you loved was weight to be shed." I wanted to say, "This house is not behind him. This house is beneath him. The way a foundation is beneath every wall that stands above it. Remove it, and everything falls." But I did not say that. I said, "Grits are ready." She left that afternoon. Told Marcus her sensory system was overwhelmed. "The old wood," she said. "The dust." Marcus apologized in the driveway, hands in his pockets, eyes on the ground. "She just needs time, Dad." I nodded. But I did not agree. Because just before she left, just before the explanation and the overnight bag and the white sneakers on the gravel, something happened that she does not know I saw. I had come down the hallway toward the kitchen, and through the open doorway of the living room, I saw Priya standing alone in front of Eleanor's piano. The morning light was hitting the stained glass. 7:15. The room was full of color, reds and golds and deep blues thrown across the keys, across the bench, across Priya's hands, which were hovering above the keyboard, not playing, not pressing, just hovering, her fingertips a quarter-inch from the ivory, and her face, the controlled, calibrated, architectural face I had come to expect, was soft, open, unguarded, in a way I had never seen. She was looking at the colored light on her hands the way Eleanor used to look at it, as if it were something sacred that had found her without permission. Then she heard my footstep. Her hands pulled back, her face closed. She turned and walked past me without a word. She was not repulsed by this house. She was terrified of it, because it was everything she wanted, and could not admit wanting. They married 4 months later. I sat in the 4th row. I wrote a check. I danced one dance with nobody, and I drove home. And what I did not know yet was that the next time I would see my son's hands shake, it would not be from nerves. It would be from something that would cost me everything I had left. The phone call I mentioned earlier, the one that came the morning after I found Eleanor's envelopes in the piano bench, was from a man named David Okonkwo at the Georgia Composite Medical Board in Atlanta. He had an administrative voice, the kind that operates inside procedures and does not deviate from them. "Mr. Moretti, I am calling to verify emergency contact information for Dr. Marcus Moretti." You are listed as his primary emergency contact on file with this office. Is that correct? I was standing in the kitchen. The cedar box with Eleanor's envelopes was still on the table where I had left it the night before. Morning light through the stained glass was beginning to throw color across the living room floor. The house was doing what it always did at 7:15, filling itself with beauty for no one. That is correct, I said. He explained that there had been a compliance matter involving Marcus's medical license. He could not share details due to privacy regulations. He was simply confirming that my contact information was current in the event that further communication was necessary. I hung up. I stood in the kitchen. Compliance matter. 2 words that sounded administrative, but landed structural. In my profession, a compliance matter means someone has violated code. It means the building is not what the paperwork says it is. I called Marcus that afternoon. He answered on the 4th ring, which was unusual. Marcus always answered on the 2nd. Dad, I am between patients. Can I call you back? I got a call from the medical board in Atlanta. I said. Silence. Not the 2-second kind. The kind that lasts long enough for you to hear the architecture of a lie assembling itself. It is nothing, he said. Paperwork issue. Credentialing stuff. I am handling it. I let it go. Not because I believed him, but because Eleanor had died 11 days ago, and I did not yet have the strength to pull up another floorboard and look at what was underneath. But I did not forget. A restorer never forgets the spot where the floor feels soft. 7 months later, on a Wednesday afternoon in May, I drove to Marcus's apartment in Midtown Savannah unannounced. I had not seen him since the funeral. He had not come for Thanksgiving, not for Christmas, not for Eleanor's birthday in January, which I spent alone at the kitchen table with a slice of the lemon cake she used to make, baked from her recipe with my hands that did not know the measurements the way hers did. I told myself I was just checking in, bringing him a box of pralines from the shop on River Street. But the truth was, the floor still felt soft, and I needed to see for myself what was beneath it. He answered the door in a t-shirt and sweatpants at 2 in the afternoon on a weekday. His face was thin, not tired thin, diminished, as if something had been subtracted from the inside and the outside had not yet caught up. Dad, what are you doing here? Brought you pralines, I said. Can I come in? The apartment was dim, blinds drawn, dishes in the sink, a blanket on the couch that had the look of something slept under repeatedly. The air had a staleness to it, the particular smell of a space that has not been open to the outside in weeks. I have encountered that smell in buildings that have been sealed too long. It is the smell of a structure suffocating. He made coffee. I watched his hands. They trembled when he lifted the pot. They shook when he poured. Not the fine tremor I had noticed when he visited Eleanor, the one I dismissed as exhaustion. This was different. This was a vibration I recognized from my work, the kind that happens in a structure under sustained invisible load. I looked at the counter behind him. A prescription bottle. Orange plastic. Turned label down. Another beside the kitchen sink. Same size, same color. Marcus, I said. He set the coffee down. The cup rattled against the counter. I need you to tell me what is happening. He did not answer immediately. He leaned against the counter, crossed his arms, and looked at the floor. I watched something move through his face, something I had seen in building owners who know the inspection is going to fail. The brief calculation of whether it is better to confess or conceal. Then he broke. Not dramatically, just a slow folding, the way a wall folds when the footing beneath it gives way. He sat down on the kitchen floor with his back against the cabinet, and he told me. 2 years ago, a car accident on I-16. Rear-ended at a stoplight. Herniated disc, L4, L5. The emergency room prescribed Vicodin. 30 tablets, 10-day supply. When the prescription ran out, the pain did not. He went back. Got another 30. Then another. Then he found that the pills did more than manage pain. They managed everything. The anxiety he carried into the emergency room every shift. The grief he could not process after Eleanor. The distance he could feel growing between himself and Priya that he did not know how to close. By month 6, he was buying oxycodone from a contact outside the hospital. By month 10, the hospital's random drug screening caught him. He was suspended, pending review. 6 months. No pay. Mandatory evaluation. Priya does not know, he said. He was looking at his hands. The shaking ones. The ones Eleanor had named before she died. She thinks I am on administrative leave. Research rotation. That is what I told her. How long, I asked. 4 months into the suspension. 2 more to go. I sat down on the kitchen floor across from him. 2 men on linoleum, surrounded by unwashed dishes and prescription bottles and the particular silence that fills a room when the truth has finally been spoken and there is no taking it back. I looked at my son. I saw the tremor in his hands, the hollows under his eyes, the way his shoulders curved inward as if trying to protect something that had already been damaged. And I thought about what Clement Duchamp told me 44 years ago in the shell of a burned chapel. Never strip what you can preserve. The original is always worth more than the replacement. I did not shout. I did not lecture. I did what I have always done when a structure is failing. I assessed the damage, and I made a plan. I found a residential treatment center outside Charleston. Private, discreet, specializing in medical professionals. The intake coordinator explained the program, the timeline, the cost, $72,000 for 90 days. I asked her to repeat the number. She did. I did not flinch. Flinching is for people who have not spent their lives calculating what things cost. The next morning I drove to Savannah Savings on Drayton Street. Sat across from a woman named Arlene who had processed Eleanor's life insurance deposit 18 months earlier. She remembered me. She was kind about it. I need to withdraw $72,000 from the retirement care fund, I said. She looked at me over her glasses. Frank, that fund is your safety net. If you ever need assisted living, in-home care, I know what it is for, Arlene. She processed it. Her fingers moved across the keyboard slowly. The way fingers move when they know the transaction they are completing is heavier than the numbers suggest. When the confirmation printed, she slid it across the desk. You are a good father, Frank. I drove home through the oak-lined streets. The Spanish moss hung motionless in the still air, like questions nobody had answered. I pulled into the driveway, sat in the truck, and opened the glove compartment where I kept a roll of architectural drafting paper and a pencil. I smoothed the paper across the steering wheel and wrote the first entry in what would become a ledger I never intended to keep. Foundation reinforcement. $72,000. Source: Retirement Care Fund. Below it, in smaller letters, I wrote the note a restorer writes when the first phase of a project is complete and the scope of what remains is not yet visible. Structural assessment ongoing. Further damage expected. I was right about that. Marcus relapsed 11 weeks after his first discharge from the Charleston facility. I know it was 11 weeks because I had been counting the way I count curing time on a restoration project. Concrete needs 28 days. Plaster needs 72 hours. My son, it turned out, needed more than 77 days of sobriety before the structure held. The call came from the facility director, a woman named Dr. An Pham, who spoke with the careful precision of someone accustomed to delivering news that no one wants to hear. Mr. Moretti, Marcus was readmitted this morning through our emergency intake. He self-presented, which is a positive indicator. But I want to be transparent with you about the severity. Self-presented. He walked in on his own. I held on to that the way you hold on to a single intact beam after a collapse. It is not enough to rebuild with, but it is proof that something survived. The second program was 90 days. Same facility, reduced to $55,000. Because Dr. Pham applied a readmission adjustment, she did not have to apply, and I did not ask her to. I learned later that she had waived nearly $15,000 in fees. When I thanked her, she said, We do not charge full price for hope, Mr. Moretti. We just try to make sure it holds this time. I drove to Savannah Savings the next morning. Arlene did not ask questions. She had stopped asking after the first withdrawal. She simply pulled up my account, confirmed the amount, and processed the transfer with keystrokes that sounded heavier each time. But the treatment was only part of it. While Marcus was in Charleston for the second time, I received a call from his attorney. Not a criminal attorney. A medical licensing attorney named Sheila Bird out of Atlanta. She explained that the Georgia Medical Board had opened a formal review of Marcus's license. The suspension was one thing. The reinstatement required legal representation, documented rehabilitation, and a formal hearing before a review panel. Her retainer was $45,000. She quoted it the way contractors quote structural repairs, matter-of-factly, because the alternative was worse. The alternative was Marcus losing his license permanently. The alternative was a 37-year-old doctor with a specialization in emergency medicine becoming unemployable in the field he had spent a decade training for. The alternative was Priya eventually learning why, and the entire architecture of their life collapsing not from the addiction itself, but from the lie built around it. I paid Sheila Bird from what remained of the retirement fund. Then came the mortgage. Marcus and Priya had purchased a townhouse in the Victorian district of Savannah 8 months before Sophie was conceived. 3 bedrooms, 2 stories, a small garden Priya had designed herself. The mortgage was $3,000 a month. Marcus had been making the payments from his salary. But Marcus no longer had a salary. He had been suspended without pay for 6 months, and Priya believed he was on a paid research rotation. The first missed payment triggered a notice. Marcus called me in a panic. "Dad, if I miss another payment, the bank sends a letter to the house. Priya will see it. She checks the mail every day." I did not ask him why he could not simply tell his wife the truth. I already knew the answer. The answer was the same architecture of concealment he had built around the crypto in Art's story, except Marcus's version was built around pills and the fear that the woman he loved would leave if she saw the foundation beneath the life she thought she was standing on. I paid the mortgage. $3,000 a month. 12 months. Because the suspension was 6 months. But the aftermath was longer. Marcus's re-entry into the hospital required a probationary period, reduced hours, reduced pay. The full salary did not return for a year. $36,000, wired monthly from my account to the mortgage servicer through an automatic transfer that Arlene set up with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had learned to process my withdrawals without commentary. And that was when I started selling the stained glass, the memory windows, the 18 panels on the shelf above my workbench. Each one salvaged from a building I had restored. Each one carried out before a wrecking ball arrived or a demolition crew moved in. Each one a piece of something beautiful that would have been lost if I had not thought to look. Eleanor called them my proof. Proof that the buildings were real. Proof that the work mattered. Proof that beauty, once made, does not have to disappear just because the structure that held it is gone. I sold them one by one. The first was a rose window fragment from a chapel on East Broughton Street, the same chapel where Clement taught me my first principle. A dealer in Charleston offered $4,000. I wrapped it in cloth, drove it to his shop, and handed it over. The way you hand over something that belongs to you in a way that money cannot replace, but circumstances demand. The second was an amber lancet from a warehouse conversion on Factor's Walk, $2,200. The third was a cobalt medallion from the old DeSoto Hotel, $3,000. Each transaction was the same. I would take the panel from the shelf, hold it up to the workshop light one last time, watch the color pass through the glass the way it had passed through it for 100 years, and then I would wrap it and drive it away. Each window I sold was a piece of Eleanor leaving the house a second time. Not her body, which had already left, but her eye, her taste, her belief that the light always finds a way in. I was selling that belief, one panel at a time, to pay for a son who did not know I was paying, and a daughter-in-law who did not know I existed in any way that mattered. Arlene processed the deposits. She saw the pattern. Small amounts arriving from antique dealers and salvage buyers, immediately followed by large amounts leaving for treatment centers and attorneys and mortgage companies. She never said anything directly, but once, sliding a deposit slip across the desk, she let her hand rest on mine, for a moment, longer than necessary. "Frank," she said, "is there an end to this?" I did not have an answer for her. By the end of that year, 14 of the 18 panels were gone. The shelf above the workbench had gaps in it like missing teeth. The workshop felt different, emptier. The light that came through the high windows was unfiltered now, plain and white and honest. But honesty is not the same as beauty. Honesty without warmth is just exposure. I kept 4 panels, then 3, then 2, and finally, I made a decision that I held to with everything I had left. One window remained, the one Eleanor loved most. A 12-inch panel of deep ruby and gold from a church on Abercorn Street that had been demolished in 1991. It hung on the east wall of the workshop, positioned so that every morning at 7:15, when the sun reached the right angle, it threw a small rainbow across the workbench and onto the living room wall beyond, where it touched the piano. I could not sell it. A restorer always keeps one original. Otherwise, you forget what you were trying to save. I wrote the updated figures on the drafting paper that evening. The column was growing the way damage reports grow on a project that has gone beyond scope. Foundation reinforcement, $72,000. Structural stabilization, Phase 2, $55,000. Legal preservation, $45,000. Load-bearing support, $36,000. Total, $208,000. And there were still bills I did not know about yet. The credit card statements arrived on a Tuesday. I had not opened Marcus's mail in months. There was no reason to. The rehab bills came directly to me. The mortgage payments left my account on the first of every month, like a quiet, reliable wound. But Arlene Caldwell at First Coastal Credit Union called that morning, and her voice had the particular softness that bankers reserve for conversations they wish they did not have to start. "Frank, there is a Visa account linked to your joint checking. The balance is $32,411. The minimum payment has been missed twice." I set down my coffee. The kitchen was very still. Through the last remaining stained glass panel, the rubioti gold piece I had kept from the Abercorn Street demolition, the 7:15 light was making its single rainbow across the piano lid. I watched it move while Arlene read the charges. Cash advances, 6 of them spread across 4 months. The largest was $8,000, withdrawn from an ATM in downtown Atlanta at 1:47 inches the morning. The smallest was $1,400, taken from a gas station in Pooler. There were restaurant charges I did not recognize, hotel rooms in cities Marcus had no reason to visit, and a single purchase from a medical supply company for $612 that Arlene said she could not explain. "The interest rate on the cash advances is 26.9%, she said. "At the current balance, the monthly interest alone is over $700. I wrote the number on the back of an envelope. $32,411. I added it to the column I kept in the yellow legal pad beside Eleanor's piano bench. The pad was almost full now. Every number on it was a room I had tried to rebuild for my son, and every room had a door he had walked out of. "Pay it," I said. "All of it. Close the card. Frank, close it, Arlene. And remove my name from any joint account that still carries his." "Everyone." She was quiet for 4 seconds. I counted them. "I will process the payoff today," she said. "But Frank, after this withdrawal, your operating balance will be limited. Very limited." I knew what limited meant. It meant the safety net Eleanor and I had spent 40 years weaving was nearly gone. The life insurance payout had been $210,000. The stained glass sales had added another $31,000. My pension covered the mortgage on the townhouse and groceries and not much else. After the rehab, the lawyer, the mortgage payments, and now the credit cards. I had spent $240,000 on a son who could not yet hold a glass of water without his fingers shaking. I thanked Arlene and hung up. Then I sat at the kitchen table for a very long time, looking at the legal pad. The numbers did not lie. They never do. Numbers are the most honest language I know. More honest than English. More honest than music. A beam can hold 4,000 pounds, or it cannot. A foundation will bear the load, or it will crack. There is no negotiation, no charm, no excuse that changes the arithmetic. I turned to a fresh page and wrote 2 words at the top. For Sophie. I did not know Sophie yet. She had not been conceived. Marcus and Priya had been married for 11 months, and I had seen my daughter-in-law exactly 3 times since the wedding, once at a restaurant where she spoke to Marcus as though I were a coat rack with ears, once at a holiday gathering where she seated me at the far end of the table beside a cousin I had never met, and once on a video call where she walked through the frame without stopping. But I knew, with the certainty that old men carry like pocket watches, that there would be a child. Marcus wanted children the way dry wood wants rain desperately, and without knowing what to do with it once it arrived. So I made a decision that Tuesday morning. I called Clement Duchamp. He was 89 years old and still sharper than most of the architects half his age. I told him I wanted to create a restricted educational trust, not for Marcus, for the child who would come. How much? Clement asked. 30,000. He was quiet. That is a significant amount given what you have already spent, Frank. I know what I have spent. Do you know what you will have left? Enough to keep the house standing. Enough to eat. Enough to keep the last window clean. He drew up the paperwork that week. The Eleanor Moretti Legacy Fund. Restricted to educational expenses, tuition, books, materials, instruments for any grandchild of Frank and Eleanor Moretti. I funded it with the last 30,000 from Eleanor's insurance payout. The trustee was Clement. Not Marcus, not Priya, not me. When I signed the papers in Clement's office on Bay Street, he looked at me over his reading glasses and said, "You are building a foundation for a person who does not exist yet. Every foundation is built before the person arrives." I said, "That is what makes it a foundation." He did not argue. I walked home through Monterey Square that afternoon. The azaleas were blooming along Bull Street, and the tourists were photographing the Mercer Williams house, and 2 young architecture students were sketching the ironwork on a garden gate. I stopped and watched them for a moment. One of them was measuring the scroll pattern with a flexible tape, calling dimensions to her partner. They were learning to read a building's bones. I wanted to tell them that the hardest thing they would ever restore was not a cornice or a column. It was a person. But I kept walking. At home I updated the legal pad. Total spent. $240,411. Credit to card payoff. $32,411. Eleanor Legacy Fund. $30,000. Grand total committed. $270,411. Remaining liquid assets. $11,340 in checking. $4,200 in savings. Pension of $2,100 per month. I closed the pad and placed it back beside the piano bench, next to the 3 cream-colored envelopes I had not yet opened. 7 months passed. Marcus called once every 2 weeks. The calls lasted between 4 and 11 minutes. He was working at a clinic in Atlanta, administrative work. Not medical, because his license was still suspended. Priya had been promoted to associate professor. They had moved to a slightly larger apartment in Midtown. He sounded steady. His voice did not shake, but he never mentioned money. And I never asked. And the silence between those 2 facts was wide enough to park a cathedral inside. Then, on a Wednesday morning in early spring, my phone lit up at 4:17 a.m. 8 words from Marcus. "Dad. Priya is in labor. Baby is coming." I read the text twice. I set the phone on the kitchen counter. I walked to the workshop, opened the cedar cabinet, and lifted the mahogany music box from its shelf. 8 months of restoration, 63 moving parts, a Swiss cylinder from the 1920s that still played Clair de Lune, as if Debussy himself had wound it that morning. I wrapped it in Eleanor's blue shawl and placed it in my leather bag. Then I put on my walking shoes and stepped into the Savannah dark. You already know what happened at that hospital door. But you do not yet know what happened after. 3 days after Sophie was born, the hospital bill arrived. Not at Marcus's apartment in Atlanta. At my townhouse in Savannah. The envelope was thin and white and had the Memorial Health logo in the upper left corner, and it sat on my kitchen table for 6 hours before I opened it, because I already knew what it would say. Not the exact number, but the weight of it. After 2 years of paying for my son's collapse, I had developed a sense for the gravity of envelopes. Light ones were reminders. Medium ones were warnings. Heavy ones were verdicts. This one was light. But light, I had learned, could be the most dangerous. The total charges for Sophie's birth were $78,600. Emergency cesarean section, $31,000. NICU observation, 48 hours. $22,400. Anesthesia, labs, medications, recovery room, and a line item simply labeled miscellaneous newborn services that cost $1,400 and which no one would ever explain to me. Priya's insurance, she was covered through the university, paid $56,600. The remaining balance was $22,000. And the bill was addressed to me. Not because I was the patient. Not because I was the father. Because 18 months earlier, when Marcus was between jobs and Priya's insurance had not yet started, I had added my name as guarantor on their hospital registration forms. Marcus had called me from a parking lot, his voice small, asking if I could help them get into the system. I had driven to Atlanta with my social security number and a checkbook and signed 3 forms in a fluorescent waiting room while Marcus stood behind me with his hands in his pockets. That signature was still active. It would remain active until someone filed the paperwork to remove it. No one had filed the paperwork. So the bill came to me. I called Memorial Health's billing department at 8 in the morning. A woman named Teresa answered. She had a careful voice. The kind people use when they have delivered bad news so many times that they have turned compassion into a professional skill. Mr. Moretti, the balance of $22,000 is due within 90 days. We offer payment plans of up to 24 months. Would you like me to set that up? Is my son aware of this bill? We sent a copy to the Atlanta address on file as well. But the guarantor is the primary responsible party. I looked at the legal pad. The yellow pages were curling at the edges now, soft from months of handling. I turned past the filled columns rehab, lawyer, mortgage, credit cards, the legacy fund, and wrote the new number at the bottom. 27,411美元 加22000美元 等于 29,2411美元. Mr. Moretti? Are you still there? I am here, I said. I have been here for a long time. I asked Teresa to send me the itemized statement and told her I would call back within the week. Then I hung up and sat in the kitchen while the 7:15 light came through the last stained glass panel and painted its single rainbow across the piano lid. The rainbow was smaller now. When Eleanor was alive and all 18 panels were in place, the morning light had turned the entire living room into a cathedral. Reds and blues and ambers moving across the walls like a slow, silent hymn. Now there was one panel and one stripe of color, and it lasted exactly 11 minutes before the angle of the sun moved past it. I had timed it. 11 minutes of beauty, bought with everything I had sold to keep my son's life from falling through the floor. I did not call Marcus that day. I did not call him the next day either. On the 3rd day, I received a second envelope. This one was from Priya. Not a bill. A note. Handwritten on university stationery. 4 sentences long. Frank, Sophie is healthy and home. Thank you for the music box. It is on her shelf. Please respect our space during this transition period. I read it 3 times. The handwriting was precise and angular, every letter the same height, every margin exact. It was the handwriting of someone who believed that neatness was the same as kindness. The words "respect our space" occupied the same emotional register as the words she had spoken in the hospital doorway. "You are not welcome here tonight, Frank." Different vocabulary. Same architecture. I put the note in the piano bench, beside Eleanor's 3 envelopes. Then I opened the legal pad to a clean page and wrote a heading I had never written before. "What I will not pay." I sat with that heading for a long time. The house was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. A mockingbird was singing in the courtyard. Eleanor had loved mockingbirds, said they were the only honest musicians because they never pretended the song was original. I listened to it cycle through 3 stolen melodies before I picked up the pen again. I did not write a list. Not yet. But I drew a line across the page, thick and deliberate. The way I had drawn load-bearing lines on restoration blueprints for 44 years. A line that said, "This is where the structure can hold weight, and past this point, it cannot." I had spent $292,411. My checking account held $6,240. My savings held $1,100. My pension was $2,100 a month. The townhouse was paid off, but the property taxes were $4,800 a year, and the insurance was $2,200, and the utilities in a house with 12-foot ceilings and original single-pane windows ran close to $400 a month in winter. I had no long-term care policy. I had no emergency fund. I had a $30,000 trust I could not touch because I had built it for a granddaughter whose mother did not want me in the room. And I had 3 envelopes from my dead wife that I still had not opened. The mockingbird finished its concert and flew away. The rainbow had moved off the piano 20 minutes ago. The house was just a house now, old walls, old wood, old man sitting at a table with a pad full of numbers that added up to everything he had and nothing he could get back. I closed the pad. I picked up the phone. Not to call Marcus. Not to call Priya. Not to call the hospital. I called Clement Duchamp. And I said 5 words I had never said in 44 years of restoring things that other people had broken. "Clement, I need to stop." What he said next changed the rest of this story. But that is for tomorrow. Clement Duchamp did not answer right away. I heard him breathing on the other end of the line. Slow and measured. The way he breathed when he was examining a load-bearing wall that everyone else had already condemned. 89 years old. And he still listened before he spoke. "Say it again, Frank. I need to stop." "Stop what exactly?" "Paying. Guaranteeing. Covering. All of it." 3 seconds of silence. "Good," he said. "Now tell me what you want to build instead." That was Clement. He never talked about tearing down. Even when you told him you were done, he asked what came next. I told him everything. Not the emotions, but the numbers. The $292,411. The checking balance of $6,240. The pension. The legacy fund sitting untouched for a granddaughter whose mother had written, "Please respect our space" on university stationery. "You have 3 problems," he said. "The hospital guarantor status, the mortgage cosign, and the absence of a will that reflects your current reality. Make 3 calls. Today, not tomorrow. A structure does not become safer by waiting." I made the first call at 9:15 a.m. Arlene Caldwell picked up on the second ring. I could hear her setting down a coffee mug, the same blue ceramic with a chip on the handle. I had sat across from her desk 11 times in 2 years, each time writing a check that made her wince. "Arlene, I need you to stop the automatic mortgage payment to Atlantic Savings. The next one is due on the 15th. Do not send it. Frank, that is the cosign mortgage for Marcus and Priya's apartment. If the payment is missed, your credit score drops 70 to 100 points. You are at 812. I am 71 years old. I own my house outright. I have no debt. What exactly would I need an 812 credit score for? She did not answer. I heard her typing. I also need a formal letter to Atlantic Savings requesting cosigner release. Cite financial hardship. Cite my age. I want my name off that mortgage within 60 days. Marcus's credit score is 589 franc. They will almost certainly deny the release. 589. Lower than 2 years ago when I first co-signed. The rehab, the missed payments, the credit card debt, all of it. Eating his number, like rust on an iron beam. Then they deny it. But I want the request on record. And I want the payment stopped regardless. Frank, Arlene, I know what happens when you exceed the load limit. The structure does not bend. It does not negotiate. It fails. I have reached my load limit. Please, stop the payment. She stopped the payment. The second call was to Atlantic Savings directly. A loan officer named Gerald Wu explained that Marcus would receive a certified letter within 10 business days, outlining the cosigner release process, the 60-day review period, and the credit requirements. If your son cannot meet the independent qualification threshold, you will remain liable for the remaining loan balance. What is the remaining balance? $431,200. I wrote the number on the legal pad. $431,200. A number so large it had stopped feeling like money and started feeling like geography, like a distance I would never be able to walk, even if I walked 45 minutes through the Savannah dark every morning for the rest of my life. Send the letter, I said. The third call was to Clement again. I need a new will. I assumed that was coming. What are you changing? The old will drafted in 2019, 2 years before Eleanor died, left everything to Marcus. The townhouse, the workshop, the stained glass panel, the piano, whatever savings remained. Eleanor and I had written it together on a Sunday afternoon while Claire de Lune played from the living room. And we had not argued about a single line, because we both believed our son would know what to do with it. We were wrong about the second part. The townhouse goes into a life estate, I said. I retain full use until my death. After that, it transfers to the Eleanor Moretti Legacy Fund, to be sold or maintained at the trustee's discretion, with all proceeds allocated to Sophie's education. Not to Marcus? Not to Marcus. Clement did not argue. The piano and the remaining stained glass panel are bequeathed directly to Sophie, held in trust until she turns 18. The workshop tools go to SCAD's preservation program. Personal effects go to Marcus, with one exception: the 3 envelopes in the piano bench. Those go to the people whose names are written on them. Eleanor decided that. And the music box? The music box is already where it belongs. Clement told me the will would be ready within the week. He asked if I wanted to name a healthcare proxy. I named him. He accepted without sentiment. Then he said something I have carried every day since. Frank, in 44 years I have watched you restore over 200 structures. You have never abandoned a project. What you are doing now is not abandonment. It is triage. You are deciding which walls can still be saved and which ones have to come down so the rest of the building survives. That is not weakness. That is the hardest kind of architecture there is. I thanked him and hung up. It was 11:40 inches the morning. 3 calls in 2 hours and 25 minutes. I had stopped a mortgage payment, initiated a cosigner release on a $431,200 loan, rewritten my will, and removed my son as my primary beneficiary. The legal pad now had a thick black line across the bottom of the page, and below it 4 words. This is the limit. I closed the pad and placed it in the piano bench beside Eleanor's envelopes and Priya's note. Then I went to the workshop, sat on the stool where I had restored 612 objects over 30 years, and waited. The certified letter would reach Marcus in 10 days. And when it did, every wall I had been holding up in silence would become visible. Every single one. The certified letter arrived on a Thursday. I know this because Marcus called me 14 minutes after the mail carrier would have reached his building in Midtown Atlanta. 14 minutes. That is how long it took my son to open an envelope, read 3 pages of legal language, and decide that his father had betrayed him. The phone rang at 2:31 inches the afternoon. I was in the workshop, sanding the edge of a mahogany window frame I had salvaged from a demolition site on Whitaker Street. The wood was from 1891, you could tell by the grain density and the way the finish had oxidized into a color that modern stains cannot replicate. I set down the sandpaper and looked at the phone screen. Marcus. I let it ring 3 times. Not because I was afraid, because I wanted to remember what the workshop sounded like before this conversation changed it. What is this, Dad? His voice was tight. Not angry yet. Tight. Like a wire that has been pulled to its working tension and is 1 degree away from snapping. It is a letter from Atlantic Savings regarding the cosigner release on your mortgage. I know what it is. I am asking you why. Because I cannot continue paying $3,000 a month for an apartment I have never been invited to enter. Silence. 4 seconds. I counted them, the way I had counted Arlene's silence 11 days ago. You were never not invited. Marcus. Priya said the timing was. Marcus. I walked 45 minutes through the dark to hold your daughter. Your wife stood in the doorway and told me I was not welcome. I left a music box on a nurse's station and walked home alone. That was 6 weeks ago. You have not called me since. He did not deny it. That was the thing about Marcus, he could not lie directly. He could omit. He could redirect. He could let someone else's words do the work while he stood behind them with his hands in his pockets. But when confronted with a plain sentence, he went quiet. And his silence was the most honest thing about him. The letter says I have 60 days to qualify independently, or the cosigner release is denied, he said. My credit score is 589. How do you know that? Because I have been watching your finances collapse for 2 years, Marcus. I have been standing underneath them. I heard him sit down. The sound of a chair scraping across a floor. Then breathing. Not steady breathing. The kind of breathing that comes when a person is trying very hard not to let the next sentence be the one that breaks something. How much, Dad? He asked it quietly. Almost a whisper. And I understood that he was not asking about the mortgage. He was asking the larger question, the one that had been sitting in the center of our silence like a cracked foundation neither of us had been willing to excavate. How much have you spent on me? I opened the legal pad. Not because I needed to read the numbers. I had memorized them months ago. But because I wanted to hear the pages turn. I wanted him to hear them turn. Every page was a season of his unraveling. And I had documented each one with the precision of a man who spent 44 years measuring structures down to the 16th of an inch. Rehabilitation. First admission. $72,000. I heard him inhale. Rehabilitation. Second admission. $55,000. Medical license attorney. $45,000. Mortgage payments. 36 months at $3,000 per month. $108,000. I paused. The workshop was very still. Sawdust floated in the afternoon light, like something golden and weightless, completely indifferent to the gravity of what I was reading. Credit card debt. $32,411. Hospital bill for Sophie's birth. Guarantor liability. $22,000. Eleanor Moretti Legacy Fund for Sophie's education. $30,000. I turned the page. Total. $364,411. The number was wrong. I had told you earlier it was $292,411, and it was at the time I wrote it. But the mortgage payments had continued for another 18 months beyond what I had initially calculated. And the compounding interest on the credit card before I closed it, and the attorney's additional filings, the number had grown. The way all numbers grow when you are not looking. Quietly. Relentlessly. Like water. Finding every crack in a foundation. Marcus did not speak for 11 seconds. I timed it on the workshop clock. The old Brassilane Goke piece Eleanor had given me for our 25th anniversary that still kept perfect time despite a hairline crack in the glass face. Dad. His voice was different now. The tightness was gone. What replaced it was something I had not heard from my son in years. Perhaps decades. It was the voice of a man who has just seen the full weight of what someone else has been carrying. And the sight has made him ashamed in a way that anger cannot reach. Dad, I did not know. I know you did not know. That was the point. Why didn't you tell me? Because you were not ready to hear it. And because Eleanor told me not to chase you. She said you would build your own rooms. I believed her. I still believe her. But I am 71 years old, Marcus, and I have run out of walls. He was crying. I could hear it, not the sound itself. Because Marcus had learned long ago to cry without noise, the way children learn when they grow up in a house where one parent is always restoring something and the other is always playing piano, and both forms of love are too large to interrupt. But I could hear the spaces between his breaths, the way they stuttered and caught. And I knew. The letter gives you 60 days, I said. That is not a punishment. That is a window. 60 days to refinance independently, to talk to Priya, to make a plan. I am not disappearing. I am stepping back so you can see the structure. And the will? He had read the attached summary. Clement had included a one-page outline of the changes. As a courtesy, the life estate, Sophie's trust, the SCAD bequest, the 3 envelopes. The will is what it needs to be. You gave the house to Sophie. I gave the house to Eleanor's fund. For Sophie. There is a difference. Dad, Marcus, I love you. That has never been the question. The question is whether love alone is a load-bearing structure, and the answer, after 44 years of restoration work, is no. Love is the reason you build. But it is not the beam. The beam is truth. And the truth is that I have been holding up walls you did not know existed, and I cannot hold them anymore. The line was quiet. Then Marcus said 4 words. Can I come home? I looked around the workshop. The salvaged window frame. The sawdust in the light. The empty shelf where the music box had lived for 8 months before I carried it through the Savannah dark. Yes, I said. But not yet. First, you need to talk to Priya. She needs to see these numbers. All of them. She does not know. I know she does not know. That is the second wall that has to come down. He said he would call her that evening. I said I would be here. Then we hung up, and the workshop was quiet again, and the sawdust settled, and the clock kept perfect time behind its cracked glass face. I did not open Eleanor's envelopes that night, but I moved them from the piano bench to the kitchen table, where the morning light would find them. They were getting closer to being ready. And so, I think, was I. Priya called on a Sunday evening. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold 20 minutes earlier. The 3 envelopes were still where I had placed them 2 days ago. Arranged in the order Eleanor had numbered them on the back, a small pencil mark in her handwriting. Barely visible unless you knew to look. I had been staring at them the way you stare at a door you have built but are not yet ready to open. The phone rang at 7:42 p.m. The screen said Marcus. But when I answered, the voice was not his. Frank. This is Priya. 4 words. No warmth, no hostility. The voice of a woman who had spent the last 48 hours learning that the floor beneath her life was not the floor she thought it was. Priya, Marcus told me. All of it. The rehab. The money. The mortgage. The credit cards. He showed me the letter from Atlantic Savings and the summary of your new will. She paused. I waited. I had learned a long time ago that the most important thing a person says is usually the thing that comes after the pause. I did not know, Frank. I understand. No. I need you to hear this clearly. I did not know about the addiction. I did not know about the rehab. I did not know about the money. Any of it. Marcus told me his parents helped with the down payment on the apartment. That was the extent of what I knew. A down payment. He said $20,000. $20,000. My son had taken $364,411 and compressed it into a single, manageable lie. $20,000. A number small enough to accept without questions, large enough to seem generous, and perfectly calibrated to make Priya believe the debt between father and son had been settled long ago. I called you a museum keeper, she said. I told you your house was not a home. I stood in a hospital doorway and told you that you were not welcome while you were carrying a music box you had spent 8 months restoring for my daughter. Yes, and the entire time you were paying our mortgage. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? It was the same question Marcus had asked. And the answer was the same. But it meant something different coming from Priya, because Priya had not merely been unaware. She had been actively constructing a version of Frank Moretti that was convenient for her architecture. The distant father long, the man who lived in the past, the restorer who could not let go. That version required my silence, and I had provided it. Because it was not my secret to tell, I said. It was Marcus's, and because I believed, perhaps wrongly, that if I held the structure long enough, he would eventually find his footing, and you would never need to know. That is not your decision to make. You are right. It was not. But it is the decision I made, and I cannot unmake it. She was quiet for a long time. I could hear Sophie in the background not crying, but making the small, formless sounds that newborns make when they are discovering that the air around them responds to their voice. It was the first time I had heard my granddaughter since the hospital, and the sound went through me like light through the last stained glass panel. Brief, concentrated, irreplaceable. Marcus said you created a fund, Priya said. For Sophie. An education fund. The Eleanor Moretti Legacy Fund. $30,000. Restricted to educational expenses. The trustee is Clement Duchamp. Not me, and not Marcus. You named it after Eleanor. It is her money. It was always her money. The life insurance, the savings Eleanor and I built that together over 40 years. I spent most of it keeping your husband alive. The last of it I put somewhere it could not be touched. Not by me. Not by Marcus. Not by anyone except the person it is meant for. Sophie. Sophie. Another pause. Sophie's small sounds continued in the background, and I sat very still in my kitchen in Savannah, listening to a granddaughter I had held for 0 seconds make noises that sounded, if you listened closely enough, like the first notes of a song that had not yet found its melody. Frank, I owe you an apology. You do not owe me anything, Priya. I owe you an apology, she repeated, and her voice shifted not louder, but firmer, the way a beam sounds when it finally settles into its true position after years of carrying weight at the wrong angle. I made judgments about you based on incomplete information. I built an entire opinion of who you were without examining the foundation. That is the opposite of what I teach my students to do. You did not have the information. I did not seek it either. There is a difference between not knowing and not looking. I let that sentence sit between us. It was, I thought, the most intelligent thing Priya had ever said to me, and possibly the most honest thing anyone had said to me since Eleanor died. The music box, she said. Sophie sleeps next to it. I did not know what it was when you left it at the nurse's station. I thought it was. I don't know what I thought it was. An obligation. A gesture. Marcus told me you spent 8 months restoring it. That it plays Clair de Lune. That it was the song Eleanor played every night for 37 years. It was. I wound it last night. After Marcus told me everything, I wound it and let it play in Sophie's room, and I sat on the floor and listened to it. And she stopped. And in the silence I heard something I had not expected. Not from Priya. Not from the woman who had categorized my life's work as manual labor with aesthetic pretension, who had called my home a museum, who had stood in a doorway and denied me entry to meet my own granddaughter. She was crying. Not the way Marcus cried, silent, hidden, learned in childhood. Priya cried the way a person cries when a wall they have been leaning against for years suddenly disappears and they discover that the thing holding them up was not the wall at all. It was someone standing on the other side of it. Priya, I am here. The music box was never an obligation. It was an invitation. It has always been an invitation. She took a breath. Then another. Sophie made a sound in the background that might have been a yawn or might have been the beginning of something. Marcus wants to come to Savannah, she said. He wants to talk to you. In person. I know. I think I would like to come too. With Sophie. If you would allow that. I looked at the 3 envelopes on the kitchen table. Eleanor's handwriting. The pencil numbers on the back. Adagio in the empty room. Sonata for shaking hands. Prelude to an open window. The door has never been locked, Priya. It has only ever been closed. There is a difference. She said they would come the following weekend. I said I would be here. Then we hung up, and the kitchen was quiet, and the tea was cold. And the envelopes sat in the lamplight like 3 small rooms waiting to be entered. I placed my hand on the first one. Adagio, in the empty room. My name. My envelope. My wife's last words to me. Not yet. But soon. Marcus arrived on a Saturday morning. He parked on the street in front of the townhouse at 9:07 a.m. I was standing at the kitchen window with a pot of coffee I had brewed 12 minutes earlier, watching the light come through the last stained glass panel the way I watched it every morning, counting the 11 minutes of color the way a man counts the last bills in his wallet. His car was the same gray Honda he had driven for 3 years. There was a car seat in the back. Empty. Priya and Sophie would come tomorrow. Today was for us. He sat in the car for 4 minutes before he opened the door. I watched him grip the steering wheel with both hands. Release it. Grip it again. His head was down. From the window I could not see his face, but I could see his shoulders doing the thing they had done since he was 14, rising slightly, tightening, as though the air above him weighed more than he could hold. I opened the door before he knocked. He looked older. Not in years, he was 38, but in the way his eyes sat in his face. Deeper. Set back. The eyes of a man who has recently been forced to look at something he spent a long time arranging not to see. I brought pastries, he said. From that place on Habersham. Come inside, Marcus. We sat at the kitchen table. The same table where I had written the legal pad. Where Eleanor's envelopes rested in the morning light. I poured 2 cups of coffee. He took his black. Some things a father remembers not because they matter, but because forgetting them would mean something has been lost that cannot be restored. For 3 minutes, neither of us spoke. The stained glass light moved across the piano lid. A cardinal sang in the courtyard. The house was doing what old houses do. Holding space. Bearing weight. Waiting for the people inside to catch up to the truth it already knew. Dad, I need to tell you something. And I need to say all of it before you respond. All right. He set down his cup. His hands were steady. I noticed that first for the first time in 2 years. My son's hands were not shaking. The pills started after Mom died. Not during. After. I was fine for 3 months. And then one morning I woke up, and the world had no floor. Like standing on ice and the ice is gone and the water underneath is not cold, it is just nothing. There is nothing underneath. He looked at his hands. A colleague gave me a prescription. Oxycodone. For back pain I did not have. 30 days became 60, and 60 became the rest of my life. And by the time I understood what was happening, I had lost the ability to understand what was happening. The drug does not take your judgment first. It takes your awareness that your judgment is gone. The cardinal outside stopped singing. The light moved past the piano. I hid it from Priya because she married a doctor. She married stability. If she saw what I had become, she would leave. I could not survive that. Not after losing Mom. He picked up the coffee, sipped, set it down. So I lied. About the money, the license, the rehab. I told her you helped with the down payment. 20,000. A clean number. A father helps son number. Not a father saves son shows son drowning number. And every time you wrote a check or sold a window, I told myself it was temporary, that I would pay you back. Was it? No. Every month you carried me was a month I did not have to look down. And I chose not to look down for 2 years. The kitchen was very quiet. I want to tell you I am sorry. But that word is too small. So instead, I will tell you what I see. He looked at me directly for the first time since he walked through the door. I see a man who spent $364,411 on a son who did not ask, did not thank, and did not deserve it. I see a man who sold his wife's stained glass windows to pay for my failure. I see a man who walked 45 minutes through the dark carrying a music box for a granddaughter he had never touched, and when his daughter-in-law shut the door, he left the gift and walked home without raising his voice. His eyes were wet, but his hands were still steady. I see my father. And I have not seen him clearly in a very long time. I set down my cup. The coffee was cold. The light had finished its 11 minutes. The house was just a house now. Old walls, old wood, 2 men sitting at a table where a woman used to sit, surrounded by the ghosts of windows that once turned ordinary mornings into something holy. Marcus. Yes. Your hands are not shaking. He looked down at them, turned them over. Palms up, then palms down. These hands that had trembled for 2 years, hidden in pockets and behind steering wheels and under tables. No, he said. They are not. How long? 47 days. 47 days. The same number as the years Eleanor and I shared 40 years of marriage. 7 years of dating before that. A coincidence that meant nothing and everything simultaneously. The way numbers do when you have spent your whole life measuring things. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. We did not speak. The house held us. And the last panel held its light. And somewhere in Atlanta, a music box sat on a shelf next to a sleeping girl who would one day learn that the song it played was delivered by a grandmother she would never meet, and a grandfather who walked through the dark to bring it to. Here. After a while, I looked at the 3 envelopes. Are you ready? I asked. Marcus followed my gaze to the cream-colored paper, to Eleanor's handwriting. Not without Priya, he said. She should be here. She is part of this. He was right. For the first time in a very long time, my son was completely right. Tomorrow then. Tomorrow. Priya arrived the next morning carrying Sophie in a car seat with one hand and the mahogany music box in the other. I saw them from the kitchen window. Marcus had gone to the door to meet them, and for a moment, the 3 of them stood on the sidewalk in front of the townhouse. My son, his wife, and a baby girl in a pale yellow blanket framed by the wrought iron gate and the live oak that Eleanor had refused to trim because she said old trees deserved to grow in whatever direction their weight carried them. It was 8:40 a.m. The light had not yet reached the stained glass panel. The house was still waiting. Priya walked through the front door and stopped. She looked at the hallway. The hardapine floors Eleanor and I had restored over a single summer in 1996, sanding and sealing every plank by hand. The plaster moldings we had repaired with horsehair and lime, matching the 1,847 original. The single stained-red glass panel at the end of the corridor ruby and gold, the last survivor catching the first edge of the morning sun. This is not a museum, she said quietly. She was not speaking to me. She was speaking to the version of herself who had stood in this same hallway 3 years ago and pronounced judgment on a house she had not understood. I did not respond. Some corrections do not need witnesses. They need space. We sat at the kitchen table. 4 chairs. 3 adults. 1 infant in a car seat on the floor between Marcus and Priya. making the small sounds I had heard through the phone 6 days earlier, sounds that were closer now, more specific, already beginning to organize themselves into patterns that would eventually become words and sentences and, if she was lucky, songs. The 3 envelopes were in the center of the table, crema-colored. Eleanor's handwriting in dark blue ink. The pencil numbers on the back, 1, 2, 3, small and precise, written by a woman who knew that the order of things mattered, even when the things themselves were beyond her control. Eleanor wrote these in September, I said. 3 weeks before she died. She had a lucid window, one of those mornings where the illness steps back, and the person you love is suddenly, completely there. She asked me to keep them in the piano bench until the house needed music again. Marcus looked at the envelopes. Priya looked at Marcus. Sophie made a sound like a question mark. The first is mine, I said. I picked up the envelope marked Adagio in the empty room. My fingers were steady. I had waited 2 years for this. I opened it. Eleanor's handwriting filled a single page. Not a letter. A set of instructions. I read them aloud. Frank, play slowly. An adagio is not a dirge. It is patience, set to music. The room will feel empty after I leave. Do not fill it. Do not rush to fill it. Sit in the quiet and let the quiet teach you what I could not. That you have always been enough without an audience. The windows will still make light. The piano will still hold its tune, and you, my love, will still be the man who fixes what others abandon. That is not stubbornness. That is faith. Play slowly. I will hear it. I set the letter on the table. The kitchen was silent. Marcus was looking at his hands. Priya was looking at me. I could not see their faces clearly, because the morning had done something to my eyes that I will not describe except to say that I am 71 years old, and I was not ashamed. The second is yours, Marcus. He picked up Sonata for shaking hands. His fingers steady now. 48 days opened the envelope, with the care of a man handling something that might break or might save him, and he could not yet tell which. He read it silently. His lips moved. Halfway through, he closed his eyes and pressed the letter flat against his chest. When he opened his eyes, he read the last paragraph aloud. A sonata has 3 movements. The first is fast, that is the part where you run. The second is slow, that is the part where you stop and look at what you have broken. The third is fast again, but different this time, because now you know where the ground is. Your hands will shake, Marcus. Let them. Shaking hands are not weak hands. They are hands that are trying to hold something too important to let go. Your father's hands shook the first time he held you. He has never told you that. Ask him. Marcus looked at me. Is that true? Yes. You never told me. Your mother asked me not to. She said she was saving it. He folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. Then he reached down and unbuckled Sophie from the car seat and lifted her carefully. The way you lift something that weighs almost nothing but means almost everything, and held her against his chest. His hands were steady. His daughter's eyes were closed. The room was very still. The third is for Priya, I said. Priya looked at the remaining envelope. Prelude to an open window. She had not expected this. I could see it in the way her body shifted a slight pull backward, the instinct of a woman who had built her identity on being the one who controlled the narrative, now confronted with evidence that a dead woman she had never met had written her into the story before she arrived. Eleanor did not know your name, I said. She wrote for the one who guards the door. I believe she meant you. Priya opened the envelope. She read the letter in silence. It took her a long time, longer than a single page should take, and I understood that she was reading it more than once. When she finished, she did not read it aloud. She set it on the table, placed both hands flat beside it, and spoke. She says that the person who guards the door is not the enemy. She says that guarding is a form of love that looks like exclusion, but is actually terror. She says Priya's voice caught. She pressed her hands harder against the table. She says that the door does not need a guard. It needs a window. And that windows do not keep people out. They let light in. The kitchen was full of something I cannot name. Not silence. Not sound. Something between them. The resonance that remains in a room after a piece of music has ended. And before the next breath begins. Marcus was holding Sophie. Priya was holding Eleanor's letter. I was holding nothing. And for the first time in 2 years, holding nothing did not feel like emptiness. It felt like space. The kind of space that exists inside a house after you have removed the walls that were never load-bearing to begin with, and you discover that the structure is stronger without them. Priya lifted the music box from the chair beside her. She placed it on the table next to the 3 open envelopes. Sophie listens to it every night, she said. I wind it before she sleeps. She does not cry when it plays. I looked at the music box. 63 parts. Swiss cylinder. Circa 1920s. 8 months of restoration. Clair de Lune encoded in brass pins on a rotating drum. Waiting to be released by a mechanism that required nothing except someone willing to turn the key. Would you like to hear it? Priya asked. Yes. She wound the box. The cylinder turned, and Debussy filled the kitchen of a 179-year-old townhouse in Savannah, Georgia, where a 71-year-old man sat with his son, his daughter-in-law, and a granddaughter he had walked 45 minutes through the dark to meet. Eleanor was right. I could hear it. The music box finished its song and the cylinder stopped turning and the kitchen was quiet in a way that did not feel like absence. It felt like arrival, the way a room feels when every person who belongs in it is finally there. Marcus was still holding Sophie against his chest. Priya's hands were still flat on the table beside Eleanor's letter. The 3 envelopes lay open like small doors that would never need to be closed again. And I was sitting in the chair where I had sat every morning for 30 years, in the house I had spent my life restoring, surrounded by people I had spent $364,011 to keep from falling apart, and for the first time, the cost did not feel like a ledger. It felt like an architect's invoice. Work completed. Structure sound. Balance due. 0. Frank, Priya said. Would you like to hold her? I looked at Sophie. She was 7 weeks old. Her eyes were open, dark, and unfocused. The way newborn eyes are when they have not yet learned to distinguish between the things that matter and the things that do not. She would learn. Everyone does. But for now, everything mattered equally. And I envied her that. Marcus lifted Sophie from his chest and placed her in my arms. She weighed 7 pounds and 4 ounces. I know this because Marcus told me later. But in the moment she weighed exactly what 45 minutes of walking through the dark weighs, and exactly what 14 sold stained glass windows weigh, and exactly what $364,411 weighs when it has been converted from money into something that breathes and blinks and curls its fingers around your thumb as though the whole engineered world comes down to the simple question of whether this hand will hold. I held. Her fingers were impossibly small. Smaller than the brass pins on the music box cylinder. Smaller than the nails I used to secure stained glass leading. Smaller than the pencil marks Eleanor had written on the backs of 3 envelopes. But they held on with the certainty of a load-bearing joint, no hesitation, no calculation. Just the blind structural conviction that what they were gripping would not let go. Hello, Sophie, I said. I am your grandfather. I walked a long way to meet you. She did not respond. She was 7 weeks old, but her fingers tightened. And the 7:15. Light, late this morning, or perhaps I had lost track of time, reached the last stained glass panel and sent its single stripe of ruby and gold across the piano lid, across the kitchen floor, across the table where 3 opened letters lay in the sun, and across the blanket of a girl who would grow up in a house full of windows because her grandmother had written that doors need light, and her grandfather had spent his life letting it in. 11 minutes. That was all the rainbow lasted. But 11 minutes was enough. After breakfast, eggs and toast that Marcus cooked while Priya fed Sophie in the living room, in the chair beside the piano, in the exact spot where Eleanor had sat for 37 years, I took them to the workshop. The shelf where the music box had lived for 8 months was empty. But beside it, wrapped in linen, was the last object I had been restoring before the phone rang at 4:17 a.m. and changed everything. A stained glass window, not one of the 18 I had collected over 30 years. A new one, or rather, an old one made new. A panel I had found in the basement of a demolished church on Abercorn Street, cracked through the center, the leading collapsed, half the glass missing. I had been rebuilding it for 11 months, matching the original colors with salvaged pieces from 6 different sources, soldering new leading by hand, filling the gaps with glass that was close enough to the original that only someone who had spent 44 years studying light through colored fragments would notice the difference. It was finished. Emerald and amber, and a deep cathedral blue that Eleanor would have loved. "This is for Sophie's room," I said. "Wherever that room turns out to be." Priya took it. She held it up to the workshop window, and the light came through it, and for a moment the room was full of color again, not the 18-panel cathedral of the old days, but something smaller and more concentrated. The way a single note played well is more powerful than a symphony played carelessly. "It is beautiful," she said. And then, quieter. "It is not a museum piece, is it?" "No. It is a window. It is meant to be installed. It is meant to let light in." She nodded. She understood. I could see it, in the way she held the panel carefully, with both hands. The way you hold something that is fragile and functional simultaneously. The way, I realized, she had been holding that hospital door 7 weeks ago. Not with cruelty, with terror. The terror of a woman who did not yet know that the man on the other side of the door was not trying to enter her life. He was trying to keep it standing. They left that afternoon. Marcus drove. Priya sat in the back beside Sophie's car seat, one hand on the music box, the other on the stained glass panel wrapped in linen. I stood on the sidewalk and watched the gray Honda pull away from the curb, turn left onto Bull Street, and disappear beneath the live oaks. The house was quiet. I went inside and sat at the piano. I had not played in 2 years, not since Eleanor's hands had become too swollen to reach the pedals, and I had stopped because playing without her felt like speaking a language to an empty room. But Eleanor's letter had said play slowly, and Eleanor was usually right about the things that mattered. I placed my fingers on the keys. They were stiff, old, 71 years of use and repair. But they found the notes the way they had always found the notes, not from memory, not from practice, but from the particular stubbornness of a man who has spent his life believing that broken things are not finished things. They are just things that need someone patient enough to sit with them until the music comes back. I played Clair de Lune. Slowly. The way Debussy intended it. The way Eleanor played it every night, for 37 years. The way a Swiss cylinder from the 1920s still played it after 8 months of restoration, 63 rebuilt parts, and a 45-minute walk through the dark. The last stained glass panel caught the afternoon light and sent a thin line of gold across the keys. Not a rainbow, not a cathedral, just a single quiet line of color that said, "This house is still standing. This music is still playing. This man is still here." And I thought as the notes fell through the empty room and out the open window, and into the Savannah evening where the live oaks held their weight, and the mockingbirds sang their stolen songs, and the old city carried its history, the Frumsivs, way all old things carry history, not as burden but as proof. I thought that Eleanor was right. An adagio is not a dirge, it is patience set to music, and restoration is not repair. It is the belief that what remains is worth the cost of staying. I am Frank Moretti. I am 71 years old. I have spent $364,411 on a family that did not ask for it. Sold 17 stained glass windows that my wife loved, rewritten my will, and walked 45 minutes through the dark, carrying a music box for a granddaughter whose mother told me I was not welcome. I would do it again. Every step, every window, every dollar, every door that closed in my face and every door I opened anyway, because that is what restorers do. We do not build new things. We save the ones that are already here. And we do it not because the structure deserves it, but because the act of saving is itself the architecture. The music ended. The light moved on. The house held still. And somewhere in Atlanta, in a room I had never seen, a music box sat on a shelf beside a sleeping girl, waiting to be wounded. If this story stayed with you, if you know what it means to carry weight that no one sees, or to walk through the dark for someone who may not open the door, then you are not alone. Share this with the person who has been your quiet architect. And if you would like to hear more stories about the people who hold us up in silence, subscribe. I will be here. I have always been here.